World War I was a war where the imagery was powerful and omnipresent when talking about it. Gray skies, brown muddy trenches, all very depressing imagery. However, not all parts of the war were the trenches of Western Europe. Being a world war, there were battles, well, around the world, including Asia. And in Asia, one of those battles led to a weird situation where captured German soldiers were sent to a Japanese prisoner of war camp. But surprisingly, it ended up being kinda nice there. And with how horrible and dreary the war was back home, many of them enjoyed staying there. Some of them even liked it so much they decided to live in Japan after the war ended altogether. In a way, it almost kinda turned into a World War I summer camp. There are many things to compare and contrast between both world wars, but one of the biggest is Japan. People often forget that Japan did participate in World War I and they were on the side of the Allies. They even joined in relatively early, having declared war on Germany on August 23rd of 1914 and Austria-Hungary 2 days later. Part of the reason was that they had an alliance treaty with the United Kingdom, but also because Japan was looking to expand its presence on the world stage. Being one of the few uncolonized countries in Asia, Japan felt like modernizing was a key part of not only avoiding colonization, but acquiring respect from European powers as well. As a result, they not only impressively industrialized, but began colonizing other areas themselves. After all, if the great respected powers had colonies or an empire, why not Japan? Japan took several Pacific islands, Korea, and impressively beat Russia in a war in 1905 to acquire territory and influence in China and Sakhalin Island. Germany had colonies in the Pacific in the form of a large group of Pacific islands, a portion of New Guinea Island, and the port city of Qingdao in China. Japan figured they could at least get a good share of these German colonies if they participated in the war. Japan sent forces to capture Qingdao, and after a week-long siege, it fell in November of 1914. It was an early victory for Japan, and the islands in the Pacific didn't take long to fall either. Except for a small part of German New Guinea holding out against Australia, the Pacific theater of World War I was over rather quickly. As we all know, the war to end all wars famously did not end by Christmas and would end up being longer than expected. Japan, as a result, built more permanent prisoner of war camps for the captured German soldiers, as well as the occasional Austro-Hungarian soldier. One thing to note, though, is while both World War I and World War II Japan had imperialist ambitions, the attitudes were otherwise quite different. I imagine most of you, when you think of Japan during World War II, you imagine military dictatorship, renewed ideas of extremism in the army, kamikaze fighters, gritty hand-to-hand combat in the jungle, and crimes against humanity against both prisoners of war and citizens. While obviously Japan was not a bunch of angels during World War I, because no one is, they were not of that scary World War II mindset at this time. Japan was under the Taisho period, which was actually a more liberally democratic time for Japan. The emperor mostly played a backseat, and as a result, democracy flourished. The military definitely played a part in politics at the time, having caused a political crisis right before World War I, but they didn't have a dictatorship hold like World War II. Japan was also much more willing to follow conventions of war at this time, as following treaties such as the Hague Convention's laws and customs on war were seen as what to do when you're a modern nation. As a result, the Japanese military during World War I was certainly not radicalized like World War II, and as a result, Japan made their prisoner of war camps very hospitable. We're going to look into what life was like for the captured soldiers at Bando POW camps specifically. But before we get there, let's talk about this video's sponsor, Ridge Wallets. Ridge makes excellently designed minimalist metal wallets that can protect your cards and cash better than a standard wallet ever could. If for whatever reason I was a soldier drafted to muddy trenches in France and I needed to bring a wallet, the metal design of the wallet wouldn't get moldy and gross like a leather wallet would. If you use the discount code EMPEROR with the link in the description, you can get your own Ridge metal wallet with a 10% discount, and you'll see why these wallets are the best. Thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. So, Camp Bando was located in Naruto, Japan. Yes, really, the location was in a place called Naruto, Japan. Camp Bando had two of its own prisoner-ran newspapers, the Barakei and the Tokushima Anzeiger. No outside news about the war was kept for prisoners. Theatrical productions existed. There were also football clubs for the prisoners that could compete with each other. Prisoners could have paroled access to nearby towns, which was very unusual for POW camps at the time. And you could even get jobs outside of the camp to make a living. The barbed wire of the camp might as well have been for decoration. As long as you followed the rules and you were relatively paroled, you could pretty much do what you wanted. They could even sell any arts and crafts they made in the camp for money as well. There was an exhibition of their artwork in Hiroshima in Japan, but it got destroyed in the atomic bombing. For food, Japanese authorities spent enough money on food for each prisoner equivalent to daily wages of an ordinary worker, and a bit more for officers. So food was never a problem either. And calories per capita were around 2,500 calories a day, which is very adequate for a prisoner of war camp. Now, it's not true that there was never, discipline. If someone caused trouble, the prisoners would be in prison. That's kind of a weird sentence to say. The prisoners would be more seriously imprisoned. So if you tried to escape or smuggle escape supplies, which did occasionally happen, or if you had to scuffle with another prisoner, then you would be further punished. But most Central Power soldiers didn't even bother, because it certainly beat being sent back home to the front lines on the trenches. There were also some tensions among the Austro-Hungarian prisoners once word came out that the empire was crumbling apart, so the different ethnic groups occasionally scuffled with each other. But otherwise it was pretty much peaceful. The most famous aspect of Camp Bondo, however, was its orchestra, which was organized by prisoner Paul Engel. Not only would they put on shows in public, but they would be the very first orchestra to play Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in all of Japan in 1918. This performance made the symphony so popular and constantly re-performed that Japan used the length of the symphony performance as the standard for how many minutes of music the first CD disc could hold, at around 74 minutes. While the armistice was signed in November of 1918, remember that technically the war ended with the treaties signed in 1919 and 1920, so the first prisoners sent home were the Czechs and the Slovaks in early 1919. The German and remaining Austro-Hungarian forces wouldn't begin returning until the end of the year of 1919 as well as into early 1920. But some prisoners, though, didn't end up wanting to return home. A small number stayed behind to have a new life in Japan or, in some cases, Japanese-occupied Korea. There were many aspects of Camp Bondo that applied to other prisoner of war camps in Japan during World War I, but Camp Bondo by far had the most documentation and studies on it. It served as a very interesting moment in World War I as well as Japanese-German relations. It also serves as a contrast to the darker legacy of Japan in World War II. There's also a movie about Camp Bondo, which I haven't seen, but it does indicate how much it's captured the imagination of several historians. In Naruto, Japan, there is even a museum dedicated to it, and Naruto has also become a sister city with Lunenburg in Germany. It's one way to find a strangely positive time that happened during one of history's most depressing time periods. I'd like to thank you all for watching, but would also like to thank my patrons. If you want to help keep my channel going, you can support me with my Patreon and get rewards such as seeing videos like this one earlier, as well as higher tier patrons getting featured in the credits or also being able to officially request for a history video that I'll make. Any support is appreciated, and you have no idea how much it helps, especially since YouTube isn't always financially stable. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.